My brother got my girlfriend pregnant. My parents kicked me out and used my savings for the baby. 3 years later, they called me, desperate for help. My brother got my girlfriend pregnant. My parents kicked me out and used my savings for the baby. 3 years later, they called me desperate for help. My existence had been simple, or so they led me to believe. I was young, deeply in love, and above all, I had a plan. My girlfriend, Abby, and I were building our future together. We were both in college, determined to finish our degrees and enter the real world as a team. My parents were supportive. They were the quintessential church-going couple, the type who never missed a Sunday service and constantly talked about the importance of hard work and family values. They were firm in their principles, sure, but they were always there when you needed them. Or so I had convinced myself. Abby and I had been together for 2 years. We met during freshman year and clicked instantly. We shared big aspirations, ambitious dreams. I always imagined I'd land a stable job, eventually pay off my student loans, and maybe buy a house in the suburbs with a white picket fence. I could already picture it. Us, a golden retriever, a family, the classic American dream. But nothing could have prepared me for the storm that was brewing. It was late when Abby told me she was expecting. Her words hit me like a sucker punch, leaving me breathless. I wasn't ready for this. We weren't prepared. We were still figuring out our lives. I had my own goals, and she had hers. But there it was, an undeniable reality staring us in the face. The following weeks were a blur of confusion. We talked for hours, weighing our options. Abby wanted to keep the baby. She was scared, but her heart was already made up. I couldn't blame her. I was terrified too, but I supported her choice. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that we were about to start a whole new chapter. And this time it wasn't just about me. It was about us as a unit. But everything changed drastically the day I found out my brother, Jake, had also been involved with Abby. I can still feel the gut-wrenching moment when she confessed. She was crying inconsolably, her face buried in her hands. She apologized profusely, but nothing could alleviate the pain. My brother, whom I had always considered my best friend, had betrayed me. Not only that, but he was the baby's father. I was speechless. My entire universe crumbled in that instant. How could they do this to me? How could she? I tried to make sense of it, but it seemed impossible. Abby and I had been together for over 2 years. How had this happened? I called Jake. I needed to hear it from him. When I confronted him, he acted indifferent. He never offered a genuine apology, simply stating that it happened and we needed to move on. Move on. My heart felt shattered. I couldn't process it. I didn't expect this from him. And then there were my parents. When they found out about the pregnancy, they were eerily calm. Too calm. I remember my mother's reaction as if it were yesterday. She simply stared at me with a blank expression and then mumbled something about God's plan. She claimed it was all part of a bigger picture, a test of faith that everyone had a role to play and we needed to accept it. My father, who had always been the stricter one, just nodded in agreement. They didn't even mention the fact that Jake was involved. They ignored it as if it were irrelevant. But when they started talking about family, that's when I lost it. They said I needed to support Jake, that this was our chance to show love and forgiveness, and that I needed to release my anger. It was all part of God's plan, they said. My mother actually said that. And as much as I wanted to scream, as much as I wanted to tell them how they had failed me, nothing I could say would change their perspective. They were so blinded by their beliefs that they couldn't see the damage this was causing me. The following days were chaotic. My parents kept pressuring me, trying to convince me that it was for the greater good. They told me to be the bigger person, to rise above the situation. They pointed out that I was the older brother. I needed to set an example for the family. The hypocrisy was overwhelming. They said they had sacrificed so much for me, and now it was my turn to fix things. The more they insisted, the more I felt like I was suffocating. I saw it clearly now. Everything I had worked for, everything I had mentally built for my future was fading away. My dream of graduating, of living independently, of fulfilling myself as a person, it was all slipping through my fingers like sand. My life wasn't just being derailed. It was being taken over by my family's choices, by a betrayal I couldn't ignore, by a plan that wasn't mine. But then came the worst part. My parents turned on me. They didn't say it outright at first, but every conversation, every suggestion they made about how I should handle the situation felt like an attack. They had made their decision. They would support Jake and Abby, and they expected me to fall in line. I told them I couldn't. It was impossible for me to support Jake, not after what he had done. I couldn't help take care of the baby. I had my own future to think about, and that didn't include cleaning up my brother's messes. They didn't take it well. My father was furious. He said I was being selfish and abandoning my family when they needed me most. My mother's voice cracked as she begged me to reconsider. She said I couldn't turn my back on my brother, that this was a test of faith, and I would regret it. But nothing they said made sense. They never held Jake accountable for his actions, never demanded that he make amends. That's when the moment that changed everything happened. They kicked me out. It wasn't a dramatic showdown, just a cold, calculated decision. They told me I couldn't stay in the house anymore. They said they couldn't have me around if I was going to be so negative, so divisive. They told me to leave and warned me I would never be welcome back unless I apologized to Jake and accepted the plan. And that was it. They took my college fund, the money I had worked so hard to save and entrusted to them for safekeeping, and used it to turn my room into a nursery for the baby. I felt my whole world crumble. The room that was once filled with dreams and hopes was now being repurposed for a child that wasn't even mine. My future, my education, my freedom were being erased in favor of a situation I had no part in. My parents said it was God's will. They said it was all part of a bigger plan, but I couldn't see it. All I saw were the remnants of what I had worked for, of everything I had believed in. They didn't even offer an apology. They simply said it was necessary. And they were right, from their perspective. This was their path now, and I was supposed to accept it. So I walked out the door, and for the next 3 years, I didn't look back. The first few weeks after I left were a blur, like my whole world had been suddenly flipped upside down. I crashed with a friend, or rather, on his couch, the weight of everything settling in. It wasn't planned, but it was my only option. I was homeless, supportless, and with only my stubborn dignity to cling to. I didn't want to wallow, but that didn't stop the resentment that simmered every time I remembered how everything had fallen apart. I couldn't get my college fund back. I didn't have the resources for legal action. The silence was the worst part. For the first time in my life, I wasn't included in family plans, wasn't part of anything. No phone calls, no texts, no dinner invitations. It was like I had simply been erased. My parents, who had once promised me the world, had now shut their doors, treating me like a stranger. Every attempt to contact them resulted in cold replies or conversations revolving around the baby. They didn't even try to understand. They only cared about Jake, Abby, and that child. I wasn't even a footnote in their lives anymore. And Jake was in every conversation. My parents talked constantly about him, about how he was taking responsibility, how committed he was to Abby, how he would be a great father. They acted like nothing had happened between us, acted like I was the one who betrayed them by refusing to help. It didn't matter that he had crossed lines in the worst possible way. He was the one they pinned all their hopes on. Nothing made sense. I had given everything to help them to do the right thing, but when I needed them the most, they abandoned me. And all for the benefit of a child that wasn't even mine. It was a cruel joke. My entire life was being rewritten by people who didn't even bother to hear my side of the story. They were too wrapped up in their plans to notice the destruction they'd caused. I spent the next few months just trying to survive. I enrolled in classes at a community college, figuring it was better than nothing. I worked part-time at a coffee shop, trying to make ends meet, trying not to think about my past, about my parents' actions. But no matter how hard I tried, the anger always returned. The betrayal lingered, gnawing at me, reminding me of everything I had lost. But long after I'd given up on any expectations from my family, the number flashed on my screen, one I hadn't seen or considered in years. For a moment, I stared at it, debating whether to answer. Curiosity won. Hello, a whisper, barely audible. Mom, I said cautiously, recognizing the voice instantly. A thick silence settled between us, heavy with unspoken tension. Son, her broken voice cracked across the line, frail and trembling. It was my mother. She uttered my name like a prayer, as if the sound alone could save her. I stayed silent, letting the weight of her own desperation sink her deeper. The silence seemed to unsettle her because she immediately started to explain. Her words tumbled over each other in a disjointed, incoherent stream. She told me they had lost everything. The house, their savings, all the stability they once took for granted, it was all gone. She said she couldn't explain it fully. Something about a bad investment and a vague mention of fraud. She said my father had been too proud to admit they were struggling until it was too late. Now they were drowning financially, barely keeping up with utilities, barely scraping together enough to eat. She asked if I was still listening, her voice cracking under the weight of her own shame. I told her I was keeping my tone deliberately neutral, distant. I wanted her to feel the separation, the casualness they'd created when they turned their backs on me. She continued, her words hesitant, but persistent. She said she wished things had been different, that she was sorry for how they treated me. She begged me to come home, to help them, to be the son they needed now that they had no one else. I waited until her words ran out, until her pleas hung in the air like smoke in a closed room. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, measured, almost impersonal. I reminded her that it had been 3 years since they decided they didn't need me. 3 years since they took everything I worked for and handed it to someone who hadn't earned it. I told her that I had spent that time clawing my way out of the hole they'd thrown me into, rebuilding my life brick by brick, alone. And now, after all this time, she thought she could call and undo all of that with a few tears and a half-hearted apology. I didn't raise my voice. There was no need. Each word was a scalpel, slicing through any lingering illusion she might have had about forgiveness. She tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. I told her that she couldn't rewrite history just because it was convenient for her now. I told her I was nothing to them then, and I was nothing to them now. Her voice broke desperately. She asked if I really despised them so much that I would let them suffer. She said they were my parents, and those bonds were stronger than anything. I laughed, a sound that didn't even seem to come from me. I told her blood only seemed to matter to them when it was convenient, when they needed someone to clean up the mess they'd made. Then I said the words I knew would hurt the most. I told her I was just a mere human, incapable of understanding God's plan. I said it with enough sharpness to sting, throwing their own sacred words back at them. I reminded her of the countless times she'd urged me to accept God's will, to set aside my own feelings for the good of the family. I asked her, if this is God's plan, then who was I to interfere? Should I just accept it just like they expected me to accept being kicked out? She sobbed into the phone, begging me to reconsider. She said they were sorry that they had learned their lesson, but I held firm. I told her their repentance was between them and their faith, not me. I wasn't their savior. I wasn't their second chance. She tried to evoke memories of the past, of my childhood, of the good times we'd shared. She said she loved me then, that she still loved me now. I told her love wasn't something you could turn on and off like a faucet. I told her love wasn't what they showed me when they threw me out of their home, stripped me of my dignity, took my money, and called it God's will. Her sobs intensified, becoming more desperate, but I didn't let them affect me. I had spent too many nights crying alone, too many days wondering if I would ever feel whole again. Her tears couldn't reach me now. They couldn't undo what was already done. I told her I owed them nothing. Not my time, not my money, not even my pity. I told her choices have consequences and it wasn't my responsibility to shield them now that they were finally experiencing them. I reminded her of the nursery built in my old room for my brother's child. I suggested she turn to him now, the son they chose over me. If anyone should be stepping up to help them, it was him. She begged me not to hang up, but I was already done. I told her I hoped they found peace in their faith, the same faith they used as a weapon to destroy me. And then I ended the call. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hands. I expected to feel something. Anger, sadness, even guilt. But I felt nothing. Just a cold, empty stillness. They had built this distance between us, piece by piece. And now it was impenetrable. I set the phone down, returning to what I'd been doing before the call, as if nothing had happened. Maybe that was the most disturbing part, that their desperation, their tears, their repentance no longer meant anything to me. They had made me a stranger, and I had accepted it. There was no going back. Update 1. It was Jake calling. He started with a calm, almost casual greeting. Said he wanted to talk. The moment I heard his voice, a flood of memories rushed back. Memories of the man who had played a part in the disaster that reshaped my world. I felt my stomach clench and my throat go dry, but I didn't let it show. I flatly refused. I asked him what he wanted, keeping my tone cool and wary. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. He said he understood the complexity of the situation, but that wasn't the real issue. He said he needed to explain something important. He sounded serious, like he'd been holding these words back for too long. As much as I despised this man, I found myself listening. Forgive me, no matter how much I tried to resist, I still held on to some hope for accountability, for some kind of genuine apology. Jake continued, speaking slowly, like he was carefully choosing his words. He admitted he'd made a mistake, admitted he hadn't handled the situation well, and things had spiraled out of control. He even expressed regret, his tone softening as he said he never meant for things to turn out so badly. For a fleeting moment, I almost allowed myself to believe him, almost convinced myself there was genuine remorse behind his words. But then the anger surged back, quicker than I could control it. My voice trembled as I repeated the words, "I'm sorry," dripping with sarcasm. Was that really all he had to say? Did he seriously think he could reduce everything to a superficial apology after all the damage he'd caused? His selfishness, his lies, his disregard for me. I couldn't accept it. I told him his apology was insufficient, not even remotely adequate. He had taken everything from me, completely wrecked my life with one irresponsible act. And now he expected me to just accept his words and move on. Jake didn't respond immediately. I could almost hear him thinking, searching for the right words to salvage the conversation. I didn't care anymore. He wasn't truly sorry. He was just sorry he got caught, sorry things hadn't gone his way. His remorse was irrelevant. His regret didn't change the fact that I had been abandoned, left behind by my own family. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, laced with more emotion than before. He said he wasn't trying to make me feel guilty, wasn't asking for my money or expecting me to fix his problems. He said, his voice low, that he was trying to make things right for me, for Abby, for the baby. I could hear the weight of those words hanging between us, but no matter how sincere he sounded, it was too late. It didn't matter. He couldn't fix this. Not now. Not ever. I couldn't listen to him anymore. I yelled at him to stop. I didn't want to hear it. This was about him and the damage he inflicted, the choice he made to hurt me and betray everything we once shared. Nothing he said could change that. Jake's voice wavered as he apologized again, this time sounding more desperate. But I was done. I'd heard enough. He could say, "I'm sorry" 1,000 times, but it wouldn't undo the pain, wouldn't repair the wreckage he'd caused. I told him I didn't want to hear it anymore, and I hung up. Update 2. A week later, the phone rang again. 7 days later. This time, a different name flashed on the screen. Abby, my brother's wife, the mother of the child they'd kicked me out for, to make room for. For a moment, I hesitated to answer, but curiosity won. Again, I wanted to hear what possible justification she could offer for dragging me back into this mess. Her voice was soft, almost timid, like she was treading on fragile ground. She greeted me tentatively, expressing her hope that I was doing well and mentioning it had been a long time since we last spoke. I didn't respond, letting the awkward silence stretch between us. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Finally, she got to the point. She said my mother had told her about our conversation the week before, about how dire the situation was, how truly bad things were. She said she understood my anger, but she begged me to consider my nephew. She said he was innocent in all of this, that he shouldn't suffer because of the mistakes the adults around him had made. I felt the anger starting to build slow and insidious. Did she have the audacity to call me asking me to fix the mess they created? And now she was bringing a child into this. I clenched my jaw trying to contain the emotional storm brewing inside me, but she continued. She said my nephew looked up to me, even though we'd never actually met. She said he deserved a chance at a proper life, and if I could only find it in my heart to forgive them, it would make all the difference. I cut her off, my voice low and cold. I told her to stop. I said I didn't want to hear another word about that child. I told her if she thought mentioning the kid would magically erase years of pain and betrayal I'd endured. She was even more delusional than I thought. She stammered, clearly taken aback by my bluntness. She said she didn't mean to upset me, that she just wanted me to understand. She said family was supposed to stick together, especially during hard times. That's when I lost it. I told her she had no right to lecture me about family, not after everything that happened. I reminded her of how they'd callously kicked me out to make room for her and her child. I reminded her how they'd used my college savings to furnish a nursery for the son of the man who had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I asked her, if you want to talk about family, maybe you should talk to my brother, the golden child. Where is he now? Why isn't he the one stepping up to fix this? She tried to defend him, saying he was doing his best, that he was working hard to provide for his family. She said they were under a lot of pressure and just needed some help to get back on their feet. I laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. I told her my brother had always been selfish, irresponsible, a taker his entire life, and I doubted that had changed. I said if she'd married him expecting something different, that was her mistake, not mine. I told her I owed them nothing. Not her, not him, not their child. She started to cry, her voice breaking as she begged me to reconsider. She said they didn't know how they were going to survive, that they were on the verge of losing everything. She said she was scared for her son's future and didn't know where else to turn. Her tears only fueled my anger. I told her if she was scared, she should have thought about that before she got involved with my brother. I reminded her that she made her choice. Now she had to live with the consequences. I told her her son's future was her responsibility, not mine. If she wanted to play the victim, she'd have to find someone else to buy her sob story. She made one last attempt, her voice trembling. She said she knew I was a good person, that deep down I still cared about my family. She said she believed I could find it in my heart to forgive for them, for the sake of the child, if nothing else. That was the last straw. I let the words flow, sharp and cutting. I called her a coward for thinking she could use a child to manipulate me. I called her delusional for believing I would ever forgive them. I called her selfish for expecting me to clean up the mess her husband had made. I told her she and my brother were a perfect match. Two people who were used to taking without giving anything in return. When I was finished, her sobs were uncontrollable. She tried to say something, but I didn't let her. I told her to save her tears because they wouldn't work on me. I suggested she inform my parents, my brother, and anyone else who cared that I was done being their scapegoat. Before she could respond, I ended the call. My hands were shaking, but not with regret. It was a kind of anger that leaves a bitter taste, the kind that keeps burning long after the flames have died down. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. I thought about the child she had mentioned, the innocent one she had tried to use as a bargaining chip. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of guilt, but it faded quickly. That child wasn't my responsibility. It wasn't my problem. I wasn't the one who brought him into a world of chaos and instability. No. That was on them. My brother, his wife, my parents. They made their choices, wrecked their lives with their own actions, and now they were scrambling to find someone to blame, someone to rescue them. But that person would never be me. Update, 3:15 days later. When I got the call from the church, I was surprised. I hadn't thought about them in years. Religion had been a central fixture in my family life growing up. However, it had always felt more like a tool for control than a source of comfort. The voice on the other end identified himself as Pastor Dave, someone I vaguely remembered from my teenage years. He said he hoped I remembered him and that he was calling to talk about my family. I braced myself expecting the usual guilt trip or moral lecture. Instead, his tone was calm, measured, and surprisingly understanding. He said he wasn't taking sides or trying to pressure me into anything, but he wanted to mediate if I was receptive. He explained that my parents had come to the church desperate, asking for help, and had mentioned our estrangement. He thought it would be valuable to hear my side of the story before making any assumptions. Something about his approach disarmed me. I didn't hear judgment in his voice. There was no implied obligation. He made it clear that this was entirely up to me and that he respected my right to refuse. For the first time in years, it felt like someone was genuinely willing to listen, not just preach. I agreed, but on my terms. I told him this wasn't going to be a sob story or a reconciliation moment. If he was calling to broker peace, he needed to understand the whole situation. He agreed, and he asked if I would be willing to share my perspective on what had happened. I started slowly, recounting the events that led to my departure. My tone was controlled, almost clinical, as if I were narrating someone else's story. Pastor Dave listened quietly, his only responses being occasional murmurs of understanding. I told him about the years that followed, the resentment and the estrangement, the sense of betrayal that never fully faded. I described how I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, without them, and how their recent attempts at contact felt like nothing more than a desperate attempt to use me again. When I finished, there was a long silence. I could hear the faint of the line as Pastor Dave processed everything I had shared. Finally, he spoke, and his voice held something unexpected: compassion. He said he was deeply sorry for everything that had happened, that no one should have to experience that kind of pain, especially from their own family. He said he hadn't understood the full extent of the situation. Clearly, my parents had only given him a partial account. He admitted he'd been prepared to ask me to consider forgiveness, but now he understood that this wasn't a simple matter of letting go of the past. He acknowledged that my family's actions had caused lasting damage and that forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to be on my terms and in my own time. There it was, someone from the church, a representative of the same faith my parents had wielded against me, acknowledging the pain I had endured. It was a strange feeling, almost surreal, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted, if only slightly. I told him I appreciated his understanding, but I made it clear that I had no intention of reconciling with my family. I explained that their recent pleas for help felt like manipulation, not genuine remorse. I told them I didn't trust them to change, and I wasn't willing to subject myself to any more pain. Pastor Dave said he respected my decision and wouldn't pressure me to reconsider. He said he believed healing was a deeply personal process, and it wasn't his place to dictate how or when I should embark on that journey. He said he would continue to pray for me, not in the superficial, performative way I'd grown accustomed to, but with a sincere hope that I found peace in whatever form it took. And for that, I was grateful. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.